End of chapter 1, part 3. You are very good at being sorry. Well, you can be sorry in a prison camp as soon as I can. I shall turn you over to the Abwehr, the police. They are bound to be out searching for you. They must have seen the parachute come down. Sooner or later they will come looking and I shall turn you in. Meanwhile, you will not integrate yourself with my children. You will not speak to them, and they will not speak to you. Do you hear me? And if you turn and run away, you will either freeze to death out there or the Abwehr will catch you. Either way, you are not going home. She held out her hand for the compass. And I will have that compass, please. Without it, you are not going home and you are not going anywhere. Peter took some time getting to his feet and he did not say a word. Towering over Muddy, he looked down at her, closed his compass, and handed it to her. Part 3, Ring of Steel, Chapter 2. I remember standing there in Aunt Lottie's kitchen, watching this confrontation, and feeling very confused. I could not understand how Muddy could be like this. It seemed to me so hypocritical. All my life she had made herself out to be this ardent pacifist, always speaking out against the war. After all, there had been a huge rift in our family because of it. Now here she is, full of unforgiving anger and hateful, vengeful even, towards someone who may have been in the uniform of our enemy, but who was trying all he could be to be kind and helpful. I wanted to tell her what I thought of her there and then, but I did not. I did not feel like I could do so in front of Peter. It was not the right moment. And there was something else that was troubling more than this. Sometimes I was feeling, and I knew I should not be feeling something I could not speak of, least of all to Muddy, and certainly not to Carlyle. I could tell no one because it was too terrible, because no one would understand. My mind was in turmoil. I had to get out. I ran out of the house and went out across the farmyard to be with Marlene. It was where I was sitting. I was sitting with her there in the hay, watching her chomping away, that I told her the dreadful truth that I dared to tell no one. When I speak of it now, all these years later, I sound like a silly romantic girl, of course. That is just what I was. I sat there, I cried my heart out, and I told an elephant if you please, that I loved this man, this airman, this enemy, whom I had not known even for 24 hours, that I knew I would love him till the day I died. It sounded ridiculous, I know, but that is how I felt. When you are 16, you feel things very immediately, very strongly, very certain. How wicked is that, Marlene, I said. How wicked is that to love someone who should be my enemy, who had just bombed my city, killed my friends. How wicked is that? I looked up into her weepy eye. For an answer, she wafted her ears gently at me and groaned deep inside herself. It was enough to tell me that she had listened and understood, and that she did not judge me. I learned something that day from Marlene about friendship, and I have never forgotten it. To be a true friend, you have to be a good listener, and I discovered that day that Marlene was the truest of friends. For some time I stayed there in Uncle Manfred's hay barn. Marlene was the only being in the entire world who knew my secret, and I wanted it to be with her and no one else. It was hard to bring myself to go back inside the house. I think it was only the cold that drove me back inside. Exhausted, I suppose, from our long walk through the snow, and still trying to get ourselves warm, we were upstairs in bed by late afternoon, all three of us in the big bedroom above the kitchen, Aunt Lottie and Uncle Manfred's room. We huddled there together under piles of blankets, leaving Peter downstairs sleeping in the chair by the stove. Muddy put a chair up against the bedroom door. I do not trust that man, she said, and was far too tired to argue by them. We all slept through the rest of that day and through the night. When I came downstairs into the kitchen the next day, Peter was sitting at the table, a map open in front of him. He smiled when he saw me and called me over to him at once. I want to show you something, Elizabeth. I've been thinking about this all night, he said. You are traveling west, aren't you? Away from the Russians? I've seen the roads, and they are full of refugees, all going west. That is where I have to go too. So, you are going where I'm going. I think the nearest Allied armies are about here, near Heidelberg, and the American army. They're about 200 miles away, maybe more, I'm not sure. A long way, that's all I know. But my compass, we could do it, I think. I cannot get by the roads. They will be too dangerous for me in my uniform. We could go across country, travel a lot by night, lie up by day. I have to go. I cannot just wait here to be caught. Do you understand? Buddy spoke up from behind me. I had not seen her come in. We are going nowhere, she said icily. Then I shall have to go on my own, Peter told her. I have to get home. Surely you can understand that? So that you can come back to Germany and bomb us some more, I suppose, Muddy replied. She shrugged and walked past him towards the stove. You go, if you want. I do not care any more. I cannot stop you. I know that now. I was foolish of me to think that I could. But we are staying here. She turned to me then. Marlene will be needing some water, Elizabeth, she went on. You could take her down to the stream. I noticed it was not iced up yesterday. It was still running. All I was trying to say, Peter interrupted. Was that what was that? I think we might all have a better chance if we stayed together. If we help one another. With my compass, I can guide you to the Americans, and we can meet up with them, and I could help. The children are too tired to move on, said Muddy, and she was adamant. She would not hear of it. And anyway, we do not need your help. We have managed quite well on our own up until now. We shall wait a few days for the snow to clear out and then move on. We do not need you, and we do not want you. I could no longer contain myself. I really gave her a piece of my mind. I told her she was being ridiculous and that we need Peter's help, that she knew it. I stormed out then, went to the barn, and led Marlene down the stream for a drink. She drank long and deep, enjoying every moment of it, filling her trunk again and again, and then pouring the water down her throat. When she had finished drinking, she had begun sloshing her trunk about and splashing me with icy water, which I did not appreciate at all. After a while I tried to encourage her to come away, leading her by the trunk, by the ear, imitating Carlyle's clicking noises, which I knew she responded to, trying to get her to move, but nothing I did or said would budge her from the stream. She wandered down into it now, ignoring me completely. I was wet. I told her. I was cold. I begged her to come out. She was no longer in a listening mood. That was when I heard Muddy screaming, not from the house, but at first I thought it must be, but from the lakeside beyond. I left Marlene and ran. I could hear Carlyle shrieking now, too. It was not until then I was through the farmyard gate, out into the field, and I could begin to understand what was happening. There was a hole in the ice about halfway between the lakeside and the island, and it was Carlyle. He had fallen through the ice. All I could see of him was his dark head and flailing hands, as he struggled to grab a hold, as he tried to keep himself afloat. And Carlyle could not swim. Muddy was at the water's edge screaming and crying, and Peter was there beside her, holding her back, his arms fast around her. She was fighting him, struggling to break free. You have to stay here, he was telling her. Stay here. It's all right. I can reach him. Leave it to me. Then he caught sight of me and was shouting for me to go and fetch a rope. I remembered that it was in the shed next to Tommy's stable that Uncle Manfred kept all his tools. All the harnesses, the chains, the ropes, everything. By the time I'd found a rope and run back with it down to the lakeside, I could see Peter was way out on the ice, down on his knees, right beside the hole, and reaching out for Carlyle, who kept disappearing under the water. Peter managed to grab hold of his hands and hang on. I tried to stop Muddy from going out onto the ice, but I wasn't strong enough. There was no way she would be left behind any longer. We clung to one another, hardly able to keep our balance as we made our way gingerly across the ice towards them. That is far enough, Peter called. Do not come any closer. Just hang on to the end of the rope, Elizabeth, and let me have the other. I looped it quickly, whirled it around and around my head, and then threw it as best I could. But the end of it fell short. I gathered it in and tried again. This time it was close enough for Peter to reach out and catch a hold of it. He was talking to Carlyle all the while, trying to calm him. Somehow he managed to get the rope around him under his arms. I've got him, he cried. Now pull, but pull gently. As Muddy and I took the strain of rope, we could see Peter had grabbed Carlyle by the back of his coat and was trying to haul him out. Moments later, Carlyle was lying there limp on the ice. Peter dragged him away, then picked him up in his arms and came sliding and stumbling past us. Carla was gray in the face and quite lifeless. Muddy was running alongside them, calling all the while for Carlyle to wake up. Once inside the house, Peter laid Carlyle down in the front of the stove, and with Muddy, peeled off his wet clothes, rubbed him down vigorously and covered him up with blankets. All I could do was stand there and watch, desperate for any sign of life in my little brother. There was none. No movement, no breathing. Muddy was beside me with despair by now, weeping over Carlyle and trying to shake him awake. Peter helped her to her feet and turned to me. "Look after your mother, will you?" he said. So I put my arms around her and I held her tight. All we could do was look in horror and in hope as Peter knelt over Carlyle, hands flat on Carlyle's chest, pumping him, then lifting his chin and blowing deep into his mouth, then pumping again and again. Long minutes went by, the longest of my life. Still Carlyle did not respond. His lips were blue and there was a stillness about him that I knew could only mean that it was over, and that there was no point in going on, and nothing could be done but now to bring him back to life. But Peter was not giving up on him, not for one moment. He stopped only to put his ear to Carlyle's chest and listen for breathing. "Come on, Carlyle!" he shouted. "Come on!" Then he went pumping and pumping. I turned to Muddy and buried my head in her shoulder, both of us weeping uncontrollably. That was when we heard the sound of sputtering. I looked, and I saw Carlyle's eyes opening, and then he was coughing and choking, and the water was spurting up out of his mouth into the kitchen floor. It kept coming and coming until at last it was all out, and he lay there breathing hard, a great smile coming over his face as he recognized us. Peter sat back on his hunches and his hands over his face. I wanted to hug him then and there, hug him tight and never let go. Muddy was on her knees, cradling Carlyle in her arms, kissing him all over his face, and Carlyle was strong enough already to try to push her away. He was never that fond of being kissed, by Muddy, or by me, or by anyone really, come to think of it. I knelt down in front of Peter then, and I took his hands away from his face. I could see he had been crying too. I knew that in the moment as our eyes met, that he felt for me what I was feeling for him. "Thank you," I said, still holding his hands in mine. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." At that time I think I was almost all the English I knew. Tears soon gave way to laughter, though, as Muddy berated Carlyle. She was back to being an exasperated mother. "Why, what were you doing out there on the ice, Carlyle?" she cried. "What were you thinking of?" "I was only trying to get to the island," he said, "to see the tree house Poppy built for us. I was nearly there and then the ice broke, and it's not my fault. It was the ice's fault. It was too thin." Uncle Manfred's clothes were a little on the small side for Peter, we discovered, as the trousers hung loose around his waist. But they were dirty, and that was all that mattered. He was soon sitting by the stove, with Carlyle still wrapped up in a blanket beside him. And Carlyle was telling him all about our tree house on the island, and how two of us used to play pirates over there, pirates from Treasure Island, Poppy's favorite book when he was a boy, and how Carlyle was always Long John Silver because he was better at limping than I was, and because he was better at being bloodthirsty than I was too. All this time Muddy was at the stove, busy hurrying herself and making potato soup. She had gone quite silent, I noticed. She seemed deep in thought. She had not said a word to Peter since Carlyle's rescue, not even when he came downstairs and dressed in Uncle Manfred's clothes and clogs. Carlyle had laughed and laughed, but Muddy still looked stone-faced. There was not a change, though. She was no longer telling us not to speak to him, and the pitchfork was nowhere to be seen. We were sitting down at the table enjoying the warmth of our soup, and Carlyle was still playing at being Long John Silver. It was yo ho ho after every sip of soup, accompanied by his squeaky parrot noises. Peter and I looked at one another over our soup and smiled. We were not only smiling at my brother's antics, we were smiling into each other's eyes. I knew at once it was the police at the door. The moment I heard the knocking, I saw the alarm in Peter's eyes. No one knocks on a door like the police.